So in 1970, my parents decide to come to the United States. And it was, I would say, pure my mom's determination and my father's, both of their intelligence. My dad had become one of the best engineers in India, working for one of the wealthiest guys in Bombay. And he was sent to the United States to get more training. Well, he came to the United States in 1968, and it turned out that he was such a good engineer, the US people wanted to hire him. There was really no training they could give him, but he would not backstab his own employer. So he said, I can't accept that. So he came back to India, and his own employer was a very interesting man, who was somewhat of a very noble person. He said, you should go to the United States. It'd be good for your family. And so my dad and my mom came to the United States in 1970. So if you've been to the US, one of the poorest cities in the United States is a city called Paterson, New Jersey. And that's where we settled. So it wasn't that different than Bombay and India, because 1970, many of you may know, was the height of the Vietnam War. The United States imperialist government had, gone 10,000 miles to invade people in Vietnam and butcher those people. So if you were in 1970 United States, this very traditional Indian family moves to Paterson. Paterson, New Jersey is predominantly African Americans. The United States is very segregated. So you see lots of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It was the time of the hippies, right? If you turn on the TV, you see war every day on TV. And so I was a 7-year-old kid. In fact, we left India on my 7th birthday on December 2nd, 1970. And in those days, it would take around almost 3 days to come to the United States, right? Because you had to go to Dubai or Bombay to Dubai, all different, London and here. So when I came to the United States, I remember I had shorts on, and it was December, and it was snowing outside. And a very, very nice family, a Black African-American family, took us to what was called the Salvation Army store, which is these stores where you have thrift, and we got our jackets and everything. So my parents were very, very aware of the need for good education. They couldn't obviously afford any of these private schools. So they would keep whatever money they earned, they would move. The way the United States is organized is you have cities, and the cities are organized by taxes, right? So the wealthier cities collect more taxes. So if you can get into the wealthier cities, you get a better public school system. So my parents, whatever money they made, they keep moving to the better cities. So we went from Paterson to Clifton to Parsippany. And so I was very aware of how hard my parents worked. And I always wanted to honor them. And so I would work very hard. So I became a very good student, was very good at sports. But in 1975, 5 years later, we went back to India. I went back with my mother because my mother's grandmother was dying. And that's my mother's mother was dying. And that's when I realized the stark difference between the United States and this village in India, right? As a child, you don't see the difference. And when I was leaving India at that time, I was there almost about 3 months. And I'm leaving, my grandparents come to the train station to wave me off. And remember, in those old days, it was the old caboose trains, with the coal. And my grandparents had no shoes. In those villages, you have no running water, barefoot. And they're crying because they know that they may not see me again for a long time. And that's when I realized the deep love that they had for me, and that within the next, 72 hours, I would be back in a completely different world, right? Which had infrastructure, all these things. And I realized that if I didn't do something for them, because I saw the stark differences in wealth and what I saw as injustice, that I would be a parasite, that I would be getting access to so much knowledge, information, education, that as a 12-year-old kid, and I still remember that feeling, as I was looking at them, we're both crying and I'm in that train, that I better do something, that I better make something of my life. So it was a very deep, deep, deep spiritual vow that I made to myself that I should do something, and that I should do something for these people who had very little, but who had such great love. So a very deep decision was made inside me. And so when I came back from that trip, I worked 10 times harder. And this was 1977, 78. I was 13 or 14 years old. I had worked, I had excelled. I took advantage of whatever I had. I had finished what's called calculus by the 8th or 9th grade, okay? Which is not typically given at the 4 years later. And my high school had no more math. And my parents had moved to one of the wealthiest public school systems then. And if you can imagine, in that public school system, all the kids are Jewish. Now, the Jewish people, very nice people, but they think they're the chosen people of God. All right. No one else can be better than them. And the school I was at had 4,000 kids. And my sister and I were the only two dark-skinned Indian kids. They never seen Indian kids. This is 1977. And so I would win at sports. I would win at everything, obviously caused a lot of jealousy. And what's interesting was, I remember this very interesting event where they were going to have a school exam to determine who was the best kid in the school. Well, this is now in the United States, and they did not allow me to participate in that exam. Okay? They did not want me to even participate, afraid that I'd win the award. And I remember my mother and my father coming home from a day's work, and they were very, very upset when they heard this. And my mother and my father went in, because they're fighters, and they completely bitched out these teachers. And they said, do you want to create a Hitler out of our son, right? Because what you're doing is completely unjust. Anyway, they let me take the exam and I won, obviously, right? But so I had, so when I talk about the caste system in India, I experienced that, and I had to learn how to fight it and endure it. And then here in the United States, I was realizing in this all Jewish school that it didn't matter how hard I worked. My mother would say, it doesn't matter. She goes, in India, we can be discriminated 9 different ways. In the United States, 3. So if you want to excel, you're going to have to, if you get a, it won't be sufficient. You'd have to get an A++. All right. And it was true. Okay. So I had to always work 3 times, 10 times harder.